From the College by the Lake, Coeur d'Alene, Idaho. Local, regional, national, and international guests discussing the issues and topics affecting the way you live are on Forum, the North Idaho College Public Forum, with your host and moderator, political scientist Tony Stewart.
May I begin today's program by wishing all of you a most happy new year, and it is the wish of our staff and our guests today both that 1997 is very good to you and a very prosperous year for you, and we're pleased to be continuing our program into a new year. Today's topic is dealing with a discussion of the upcoming session of the Idaho Legislature, which is about to convene with the airing of this program, and we're very fortunate to have two guests who are highly qualified to discuss what I would describe as a rather long menu of things that may surface in this session of the legislature. I first of all welcome to the program State Senator Gordon Crow. Senator Crow has just been reelected to his second term in the State Senate from Coeur d'Alene, and congratulations, Senator Crow.
Thank you, Tony.
And we look forward to discussing with you what you anticipate this session to be all about. And secondly, we welcome to the program Freeman Duncan, who is a former member of the Idaho Legislature. He served in the House of Representatives, and now he is the legislative liaison for the Attorney General of Idaho during the legislative session, and also he's a practicing attorney here in Coeur d'Alene, and we're very pleased to have both of you here.
Thank you, Tony.
Senator Crow, may I start with you? And you and I have had a few talks already about the program that we're doing today and what might be expected. And I think in my years of being a spectator of the legislature, I don't think we've had a session in a long time that maybe there's many things that are going to be on your plate that are the result of some national policies. And so let's start in that arena. Would you talk to us a little bit about what you anticipate in the utility deregulation as it relates to these new policies?
Well, yeah, what we've heard as far as utilities go, one is telecommunications deregulation as well as other energy producing companies, types of deregulation coming down. The information that we've got so far has been from a task force that has been looking at this for a little over a year now. They've been sending out some anecdotal information about their findings, as well as from the suppliers, the telephone companies and the power companies and all that are certainly starting to try to position themselves to come out of it as best they can and for the best of their both their stockholders and their users out there. The anecdotal information we have is we're going to be looking at how does deregulation in Idaho affect both the user as well as the supplier of it. How do we maintain competition among the suppliers as well as maintain the historically low energy rates and certainly adequately low telephone and long distance rates that we've had before. And the big boys are posturing to try and get their message across, and the smaller companies are posturing trying to get their message across. And I have a feeling that we're going to be burning a lot of midnight oil while we're in session in Boise this year, trying to ferret out what's the best for all Idaho during this.
It might even lengthen the session depending on how complex that legislation gets. Could you give us a little bit more background on what are some of the options that might come out of this? I know you've already in your answer indicated that you have some rather large companies involved and you have smaller suppliers. And is this going to result in more companies being involved or serving different areas? What are some options?
From my very limited knowledge on this, is what we're looking at is currently, prior to deregulation, what we have is phone companies or certain types of utility companies who have certain segments of the map cut out that they are exclusively authorized to sell into. I have had mail sent to me from some of these suppliers saying it should stay that way. I've had other mail from other companies that say we should be allowed to expand into that. So the determination we're going to have to make is what's best for the average Idahoan, what's best for their phone bill, what's best competitively for services we should allow to be offered into it. One of the options, if I understand what I'm reading properly, that we have is to turn it all over to the Idaho Public Utilities Commission and say, you decide. There's another camp out there that says, don't do that. They don't know how to make these decisions. Leave it in the legislature and let's put into code how we want this happening. So that'll probably be the first hurdle we have to get over in the debate on deregulation. And then, as is often the case, it may end up being part of that and part of giving the IPUC something to work on there.
The Congress and the President passed a very major piece of legislation that the Congress passed and the President signed dealing with telecommunications. And there's this, again, that same kind of struggle between like cable companies and major production companies. What do you think is going to happen in that arena? Is state law also affected by that national legislation?
Yeah, well, it has been my party who's been harping on devolution of power down to the states, and we've got it now. And as far as the cable industries go, there's already bantering about and positioning out there as we don't want cable television companies doing telephone company work, and we don't want telephone companies doing cable television work and all that. So those are some questions. I don't have any more firm definition for you other than the very general knowledge on the deregulation that we have. But I am confident, even if it takes a few extra days longer than our standard 68 days session that we've established the last 2 years, which you're probably right, deregulation will probably force us maybe a little bit past that, but we're going to have to get into the nuts and bolts of this. And this interim committee that's been working, the task force that was brought together, has done a whole lot of legwork on this, and we're going to be somewhat dependent on them to give us the answers to the questions that are going to rise out of the session on that.
You triggered my thinking in another arena there too, that as you deal with this, other states, our neighbors are going to be dealing with it too, because this is something that's been affecting all over the country. Will there be any sharing of notes, or I'll put it another way, is maybe what would be good for one state might not be as helpful in another state because of population or economic differences?
Yeah, and yes and no. We look at Idaho, that's a state that's kind of extruded north to south, where there's substantially different needs in the southern part of the state or in the Ada County, Boise area than there is in the Coeur d'Alene, Kootenai County area. Similarly, Washington State's in the same boat, where the demographics and needs of the people in Spokane are substantially different than the people east of the mountains, or even between Spokane and the Tri-Cities. Obviously, when you're talking about telecommunications and communications type deregulation, you're talking about something that generally will not know state boundaries. And you're talking about creating a more competitive situation. So I would think, and until I'm corrected, that we are going to have to not just watch what other states are doing, but we're going to have to coordinate efforts to make sure that there's not some disparity in the services offered because of some imaginary yet important state line there.
That's an important point to make. Freeman, I know that your experience as a legislator now with the Attorney General, you have interest in these areas too. I would invite you to speak to the same issue, and I would add to that too that there's a lot of discussion in the Northwest that if Bonneville is sold and so forth, this may affect rates and all. You know, if we've been kind of in some situation, similar situation as to TVA in the Tennessee Valley and so forth. Would you like to address any of those areas?
Well, in the Attorney General's office, we've kind of been watching the deregulation. We had a bill in the 96 session of the legislature to deal with a consumer protection issue on the 900 calls, the pay per telephone call, where we're finding in our consumer division a lot of abuse. We pulled that bill out because of the uncertainty of how deregulation would affect what we were trying to do. We're going to come back in this session and deal solely with the adult entertainment calls. Our statistics show that the vast majority of problems with 900 liability, where people are claiming they didn't make the calls, didn't authorize the calls, people in their household didn't make the calls, are the vast majority of those complaints are about adult entertainment. So we're going to try and deal with that and stay out of the deregulation part of it and try and cure that consumer problem. Kind of interesting, I think it was a lady up here in North Idaho, I believe in her early or late 70s, was told that she'd made $250 worth of adult education calls, and of course she denied that, and everybody believes that she didn't, and those are the kinds of problems we're going to deal with. So that's the interaction with the AG's office. With the one might assume that the AG has some regulatory authority in that, but we don't. It's the Public Utilities Commission. So,
and the legislation will go to them for administration.
Well, our hope is not to pass legislation that they have to defend. We hope we can pass clean legislation on this and get it done cleanly the first time up.
But the Utility Commission then would be the administrator of that.
I'm not exactly sure how that'd work out, Freeman, as far as the legal. I'm sure it's dependent on how we craft the legislation, how it's written into code and all that.
But we see a short session, as Senator Crow indicated, maybe not 67-day sessions of the past two, but there certainly is that continuing emphasis by leadership, whatever the leadership turns out to be after their organizational session, to cut down on the session. So at least in the Attorney General's office, in our packet, we're going to get it in early, get it to committee early, try to get it out of its house of initiation early, and get it across the rotunda as quickly as possible, because it costs about $25,000 a day to run the legislature. So leadership of both the House and the Senate has a built-in incentive to try and keep around that 70 to 75 day session.
A change a couple of years ago has helped that process too. There's a pre-filing of bills, I believe it's in the House, isn't it? That you
just in the House,
and you can get those in before the session starts. Freeman, I promised to give you the opportunity today, and we're going to go back and forth between you and Senator Crow, but tell us more about the rest of the legislative agenda of our Attorney General's office.
Well, and the national scope that you wanted to talk about, in the federal crime control bill that President Clinton signed in the summer that was part of the 100,000 new police officers on the street, there was a provision in that mandated by September of '97 that states adopt what's called a Megan's Law. A Megan's Law was a New Jersey reaction to a very bad situation where a young girl named Megan was raped and murdered by a recently released serious sex offender. Megan's Law provision requires states to have some form of community notification. Currently, Idaho has a serious sex offender registration system, but we really don't have a community notification system. So we're looking closely at that, at what the federal guidelines for that are going to be, and whether we truly have to have that adopted in this session. At risk, if we truly have to have it adopted in this session to meet the September '97 deadline, is about $250,000 of federal law enforcement grant money called burn grants. So we're working on that daily, trying to figure out if we have to do it. We kind of hope that we don't have to do it, that it doesn't have to be rushed, because it's really a sensitive area. The states that have notification systems are in court battling over them right now. So we'd prefer to wait to the '98 session and see how some of those court cases come down. Another problem we're working on is what's called habeas corpus, a Latin term. That's the cause of action that's used by people that are in prison that don't like being in prison. We started 2 years ago with legislation to deal with the death penalty appeals, and then last year we had legislation to do with the frivolous inmate litigation. This is going to be our third of that trilogy, is to refine the habeas corpus proceeding, which quite honestly is being used by inmates that have nothing better to do and not very happy about their situation to file claims against the state. So that'll be a fairly monumental one. It won't be one that will make a lot of news, but it's very important to the justice system. We probably won't sponsor, Tony, the legislation on bombing, but we are very interested in it. We're going to help the Prosecutors Association that is going to be the sponsor of it, but there's renewed interest in that. Just in the last couple of days, 2 police officers in Boise were searching the trunk of a car they'd pulled over and opened a box, and 2 bombs exploded. One's seriously injured and in the hospital. So there's a lot of renewed interest on this state having the ability to prosecute people for carrying materials to be used to make bombs.
If we can just have a little edification for our viewers, it is my understanding that if you make a bomb in this state, even one that was as powerful as the Oklahoma City bombing, it is against federal law but not against state law unless it actually goes off. Is that a fair description?
That's a fair description. Certainly if you made a threat or if you did entered in a conspiracy, there would be some laws that would be violated. But the thing we see more is the bombs in the trunk. Mm-hmm. For example, in Boise right now, all the Boise prosecutor can do is charge him with the guy that was driving the car didn't have a driver's license. Mm-hmm. And the feds are not likely to come in on those cases because of their agendas. So that, as you know, that was in the Senate Judiciary Committee last year, was in a little late. There were some concerns about it registered by one of the state senators who's an attorney, and there's been conversations with him to see if his concerns can be satisfied. So I think it has a real good chance this year, and certainly supported by the law enforcement community.
Thank you. Senator Crow, let's move on to, we never do these programs on reviewing the legislature without dealing with some money issues.
Sure.
That's the budget and finances always consumes a lot of your time. For our viewers who live out of state, we had what was called the 1% property tax initiative or limit. It did fail. I believe 60-some% of the voters voted no, but the governors expressed concern, as well as many of the legislature, about the whole issue of property tax and how we deal with that. And I want to ask both you and Freeman Duncan to share with our viewers what you think may happen in relation to the whole question of revenue and how we fund different programs and how that relates to property tax.
Well, there's very much of what we do relates to property tax, including local issues as far as distribution of sales tax and how that's affected. But speaking directly to the property tax issue, I believe the governor in November during the North Idaho legislative tour in Lewiston this year, he kind of threw down the gauntlet and caught me by surprise. I don't know if Freeman was expecting that or not, but he announced there in front of the legislators in a major speech that he thinks we should turn our sights back to the Constitution and the facet of the Constitution that does not allow us to positively impact assessed values of property, to be able to keep those down. In reality, the levy rate, the amount of taxes that taxing districts were levying on assessed value of property had very little to do with the escalating property taxes around here, very little to do in comparison to the assessments of them. The fact of the matter is a large percentage of Idahoans do not today pay more than 1% of the assessed value of their property. The problem wasn't levy rates and mill rates going up. The problem was assessments going up. Your house,
counties.
Yeah, and in certain specific areas around the state, Kootenai County being one, Bonneville County, Blaine County, Ada County, Canyon County, some of the high growth areas of the states, and people saw their house, the literal value of market value of their house doubling and tripling or even more over the course of 10 years. So the governor, I think very wisely, I know Freeman debated against the 1% throughout the state this year and attacked the assessment as well, and I think the governor's bringing the focus onto the right area. The difficulty is going to be we have to open up the Constitution and look at it, to look at that assessment, and Freeman's our constitutional expert on that, so it'll be interesting to see what happens.
We are certainly getting ready. Vast majority of my job as legislative liaison is to help the legislators get legal advice, and we realize there's going to be many novel suggestions on how to alter the assessment side, and as the governor has said, it may take a constitutional amendment. But to me, it's so logical that the real fault with property tax is that it's a tax on unrealized wealth. The fact that a house similar to yours sold on the market for $150,000 doesn't mean much to you when you don't intend to sell your house. And the states that have successfully dealt with that issue have done it on the assessment side, but they did not have the constitutional provision we do that requires the uniformity. So we're prepared for a lot of people asking us, is this constitutional? Fortunately, I don't usually answer that. I give it to somebody who's smarter to do it.
I believe I'm correct. I'm always cautious about not understanding something, but some years ago, I believe the property in this state was based on a 20% for residential property, 30% commercial, 4% utilities, and then that was declared unconstitutional is by statute, I believe, and that's what Governor Batt is speaking to, I think, is if we change the Constitution, then that might create that situation again. I believe I'm correct on that,
right.
But without a constitutional change, then you are indicating that we could not look at some of those differences in property. Is that correct, the evaluation?
There could be some tinkering with the assessment system, and certainly there are exceptions already. There's 24, I think, exemptions. But if you truly wanted to deal with when is property going to be revalued, as California did with Prop 13, only when it's sold, or every 5 years, or whatever the suggestion would be, the effect upon uniformity that would have, you'd have to get the Constitution changed to allow for that.
Senator Crow.
Tony, I'm not convinced that the governor's plan of session before last has been given enough time to work too. I look back, historically speaking, people who were around in 68 or 69, whenever they put in the cap, maybe it was 78, put in the 5% growth in government cap, said that worked fine, that you didn't have these property tax revolts as long as the growth in government was limited, and that the property tax, or the 1%, became a viable commodity again with the electorate only when they removed that cap and they started outspending beyond what they were. So maybe we don't have to deal with the Constitution. It bears looking into, and it bears starting the debate now, but we also have a taxing program that was begun in '95 that I believe we need to give some time to work in. That's the 3% cap on growth in local government.
One of the things that you both have brought up, to my mind, is that, too, when you're zeroing in on the value of property in these fast-growing areas, that is really a legitimate area to look at. I was thinking if someone might own a home and they might pay a very high tax based on the high value, the property keeps going up. And they do this for 10 or 15 years, and they've lived there all the time. And then all at once there's a economic downturn, and the property drops 30 or 40%, and they sell, but they've been paying taxes on a much higher value than they can sell the property. And that's one of the problems too, isn't it?
Sure.
I do want to move to some other areas. One of the things we talked about, we've been talking about for years, and there's been improvements in certain sections, but for our viewers out of state, there's a north-south highway in Idaho called Highway 95, and it's been described from a goat trail to other terms over the years, but there has been improvement with funding in certain sections, but there's still problems. And would you like to speak to how that may be addressed, Senator Crow?
Well, Tony, it's still a major problem. In fact, Freeman and I attended a chamber meeting here not long ago where that was still their number one issue. I think that in the last couple of years we've made huge strides in it. Anybody who drives 95 principally from Sandpoint south to Moscow even now, you'll see miles and miles of improvements. It's still not enough. We still don't have a north-south route because of the condition of the rest of 95. The governor has made an emphasis in both of his State of the State addresses, or State of the Economy addresses, in both of his first years in office. He's put an emphasis on that, Highway 95, and I believe we're starting to see that shake out now on it. Beyond that, Representative Hilda Kellogg from Post Falls has what I think is the answer, $330 million bonding bill that would pay for the whole thing, get the money generated for it. She brought it up in the 95 or 96 session, and another bill passed ahead of it that kind of rendered it less debatable at that point. But she has indicated that she's going to come back hard with that. I'm going to support that. She's the expert on it. I'm not, except for I do drive 95 quite often, as much as you do too, and Freeman does too. And I'm hopeful that Representative Kellogg, in her years of experience, will get this over the top, and maybe we can get something going with that.
Her proposal is very similar to others that came down the pike several years ago, back 10 or 12, 15 years ago, when they addressed the Lewiston grade and the Whitebird and so forth. And so those sections got improved, but there are others that you're talking about like that.
The Port of Lewiston, Tony, has also done a good job in the last year, I think, of raising the awareness of how important that port could be to Idaho and to North Idaho, and how it's being damaged by the lack of a road system to the port. When we were down there for the North Idaho legislative tour, they can dollar for dollar beat the shipping costs of almost anybody if they can get to the port and use that system. But when you add in the costs and the inability to get to the port, and some major trucking company as a company policy has just said they will not drive 95 until it's fixed. And so they're pushing real hard to I think, mentally make the Department of Transportation look at 95 in sections. You know, don't try to do all of it at one time, but look at maybe giving priority to the Lewiston to the Canadian border section for that reason, and maybe not spend as much money down in the Weiser, Parma, Fruitland area, even though they probably have problems down there too. I mean, you know, there's safety issues, but there are also commerce issues. And what the Port of Lewiston is saying is commerce issues have not been really factored in before. It's always been the safety issues. If this bend or this width, that this has so many accidents per whatever, then that's one that money is directed to, rather than looking at the commerce issue too.
So the commerce issue is one in which a lot of the Canadian business goes other places or goes west?
Well, they come in through, if they happen to come through North Idaho, through, I forget the embarkation point up there where it's the windy road come out of it, which they don't, then they turn east or west as soon as they get to Bonners or something like that. The one thing that Freeman hit on that's going to make a major difference, I think, is the chambers of commerce all up and down Highway 95, principally up north, have done their homework. 2 years ago they brought this up, and they said, we think commerce can be improved through this. And we said, we think is good, but we need it quantified. And the Port of Lewiston, the Coeur d'Alene Area Chamber of Commerce, Sandpoint Chamber of Commerce, and everything from the Canadian border, Sandpoint Chamber of Commerce have done a wonderful job in quantifying the commercial benefit it would be to bring this up. So we have a lot more bullets to put in our gun and run down to the legislature with, plus the fact that Governor Batt has prominently mentioned Highway 95, particularly in North Idaho, twice now in 2 State of the Economy addresses, and we got to find the money to fix that.
So you're really talking about two things that are well, there are more than two, maybe, but two really outstanding ones is that affecting the business commerce, and number two, safety issue of safer highways for people to travel. Another issue that I know before we went on the air, we were sitting here talking about how we can do certain things locally or in the state, but also we are affected by our neighbors in our adjoining states, and we work together. Share with us a little bit about anything that might come up in the legislative session, or maybe it doesn't have to be by law. Maybe it can be done administratively, concerning taxes across state lines. Sales tax, you know, if a state doesn't have a sales tax, and or if they're getting business from our state and so forth, what is developing on that front?
Well, last session, Tony, there was a bill that was introduced in the House and was defeated, I think, over in the Senate that tried to give some special sales tax relief to two border counties. I think it was Payette and Washington. When we did the constitutional law analysis of that, we were able to come back and say in an opinion that if there was enough of a nexus there to get over the hurdle of special legislation and the other uniformity issues. So I think there'll be another attempt. If they can make a case for how unique their situation is, you may see some of that for the border communities. Of course, we've seen that legislation I think Representative Kellogg worked on in the 94 session dealing with disadvantaged border counties under urban renewal financing. Was able to make a case that there ought to be some special exceptions to urban renewal tax increment financing for that. So as you probably know, there is a constitutional provision in Idaho says that there should be no special legislation. But there may be ways to meet that test and accomplish some of these results.
It's one way you go about that is you say all cities or all counties, a certain population, the whole state can do certain things, although it may only affect one or two.
Well, you know, and Cooney County came up with the novel resort county option tax last year. Yes, that's how you do it.
And as unpopular as that was, and as tough as the resort counties tax was for us to squeeze through, you're going to have a handful of other counties going for it this year too. Sales tax is an interesting issue, particularly when you talk about the difference between Payette and Washington counties, which border Oregon, who have no kootenai tax, and you talk about Kootenai County, who essentially has a 3 penny per dollar advantage.
I'm
right
so
now over
sorry to interrupt.
Washington.
The clock always wins on this program. I'm so sorry we're out of time, but I do want to invite both of you back at the end of the session. Let us review what has happened. I hope you will do that with us.
Here.
Ladies and gentlemen, our guests have been Senator Gordon Crow and Mr. Freeman Duncan from the Attorney General's office discussing the upcoming session of the Idaho Legislature. I would invite you to be with us again next week at this same time when we will discuss yet another subject. Until then, please have a good week. I am Tony Stewart.
The North Idaho College Public Forum was videotaped live from the studios of Instructional Technology on the campus of North Idaho College for viewing at this more appropriate time. We invite you to join us again next week for another all-new edition of the North Idaho College Public Forum on this public television station.